My name's Tom Byrne. I'm the president and CEO of the Korea Society, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's program. With an eye towards developments in Asia, the Korea Society has recently focused on Korea's regional relations, with particular attention paid to Seoul's diplomatic and economic relations with Tokyo and Beijing. In September, we welcomed the Council on Foreign Relations Senior Fellow, Sheila Smith, and the Korea Society's Chairman, Ambassador Tom Hubbard, for discussion on Korea-Japan relations. And last week, we welcomed former Chinese diplomat Yang Shi-yu for a discussion about China's role on the Korean Peninsula. Today, we are very pleased to be joined by 4 scholars, 2 from Korea and 2 from China, who have the ability to inject fresh thinking and a creative outlook to the conversation. So today the panelists are Dr. Nan Li, from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences Institute of American Studies. Welcome to the Korea Society. Dr. Jihwan Hwang from the University of Seoul. Okay. Dr. Jina Kim from the Korea Institute for Defense Analysis. Thank you, Jina. And Dr. Xiaoyu Pu from the University of Nevada, Reno. We look forward today to an animated discussion from these bright minds. And now I will turn the proceedings over to the Korea Society Senior Director, Dr. Stephen Noerper.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you all for your time and joining us today. And I did also, by way of introduction, want to point out to Rory Daniels here, who was instrumental in putting this together for the National Committee on American Foreign Policy, and she has had our distinguished visitors here in town. And so for all of you from the National Committee who are here at this Korea Society hosted event, thank you. And we're delighted to be enjoying, again, the benefits of a close strategic partnership with the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. I'd also like to welcome all of those streaming and listening via podcast and YouTube video. But as Tom mentioned, we have made a real effort at defining better the understanding of regional relations over the course of this autumn program season. And the effort of the National Committee and today the Korea Society is to try to gather some of those thoughts for you here, especially the professionals from finance, international organizations, and the media. If I could ask each of our speakers to begin perhaps with a little bit more of any introduction to yourself or your current endeavor, but then if you had a main point of emphasis that you'd like to lead with. And we'll keep that relatively short. We'll try to contain that to about 6-8 minutes, and then we'll move to some more open discussion back and forth, and then we'll turn it over at about the half-hour mark to those of you here in the audience for open exchange and questions. Dr. Hwang, why don't we begin with you?
Okay, let me first speak about why the North Korea nuclear crisis has so difficult to resolve for the last 25 years. The reason is that the difference of perception on this issue between the U.S. and North Korea. Of course, North Korea started its nuclear program, but for the last 25 years, more than 25 years, so, what North Korean thinking was completely different from what the U.S. has thought on the Korean Peninsula. As of 2019, North Korea's position on the denuclearization and peace regime on the Korean Peninsula is a step-by-step approach, simultaneously and in parallel. The U.S. is also agreed to the step-by-step approach, but the United States wants to see the end state of the denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. So there is a deep concern about this kind of difference of perception between the U.S. and North Korea. So this is a kind of a dilemma between the two. It's like the chicken egg dilemma, which one goes first? North Korea argues that the U.S. should go first, while the U.S. and South Korea wants to see that the North Korea goes first. So there is some dilemma between the denuclearization and peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. So while the U.S. and South Korea argues for the CVID, FFVD, that, but North Korea, always, has argued for the CVIG and FFVG. I mean, the complete verifiable, irreversible, the guarantee of the regime. As opposed to the U.S. and South Korea's argument on the complete, the verifiable, irreversible. The denuclearization. So there is a deep concern about this kind of the difference of perception on the denuclearization, not only on the denuclearization, on the peace regime. So there should be some kind of trade-off between these two. So we need to think about both, the issues when we try to resolve the North Korean nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Lee Nan.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'd like to share my views on North Korea issue with you, and I'd like to hear your comments. Actually, when we talk about the new thinking, and actually, when I heard that, I think, how can we have a new thinking in this area where so many, I think the Cold War thinking dominate. So you can hear alliance, enemy, and nuclear test, and military exercises. And so that's why when we talk about the new thinking, just I'd like to talk about the Chinese experience on this issue. So in 2017, when South Korea decided to deploy THAAD in South Korea, and China really mad, and but at that time, North Korea were very happy because they think China will support North Korea. And but in 2017, when North Korea keep launching the missile and making the nuclear test, and China have a really strict sanction on the UN level. And so that's why in 2017, when I go to both Korea, I can hear the complaint from both Korea. So very seriously from the North Korea, they complain about China. And so a lot of Chinese think we should go back to the Cold War thinking and choose one side. But actually right now, since last year when President Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un met the summit in several times. So a lot of Chinese people ask me if China is going back to the traditional policy. But actually, my answer is no. And I think China found out there's a change in North Korean society, especially we know they are going to be reformed themselves. And I think there will be like dramatic change in North Korea. So that's why when I went to North Korea this year, I can feel the change. It really happened. So politically, you can know in the April, the North Korean changed their political structure and adding more young members going to the decision-making process, and also the role of the military commission, I think, is being decreased. And also they improve the diplomatic level in the decision-making process. And I think that's the most important. They really focus on the economy. And so especially in Changmadang, the market, free market in North Korea everywhere. So if even the local official trying to stop the market, I know there's a demonstration in the market. So people need this free market, and they have a big change. Also, the light industry is really improved in North Korea. So that's why the shoes that we're wearing now is North Korean shoes. It's really good. And I went to Tibet this summer, and it's really good. And I don't want to advertising the North Korean goods here, but I just say it's good. Yeah. So I think the light industry is really good, and you can see from 2016 to now, when I went to North Korea every year, I can feel the Chinese goods, especially shoes and clothes, is less and less in Pyongyang. So that's why I think they are really experienced the economic reform. And so that's why my judgment is North Korean society is going from have this great transition from the military first to the economy oriented. So that's why China realized that. So China want to grab this chance to reform, help North Korea to reform themselves. So that's why I think China right now its policy is just leave this denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula to South Korea and the United States. We really want to cooperate with North Korea in the area unrelated to the sanction. And China, of course, keeps the sanction, but so many areas unrelated to the sanction. For example, when Kim Jong-un visited China the third time, Kim Jong-un visited Chinese traditional medicine store factories. And so showing to the world, China can have the cooperation with North Korea in many areas, especially like environmental protection. Every time I went to Pyongyang, the air is so polluted. So I think they need the environmental protection. So that's why China realized, so this is the chance for China. I don't know if this is a new thinking, but maybe this Chinese thinking could help us to have a better new thinking form in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jina Kim.
Yes, thank you for having me today. Well, the question that many of us have in mind is, will North Korea continue to have a dialogue with the U.S. in the near future? Well, North Korea, again, is back to a negotiation table. I have 4 hypotheses why North Korea did that. Well, first of all, we can think that, it's just because of the sanctions pressure, right? So perhaps North Korea wants to lift the sanction, but it's unlikely that the U.S. government will lift the sanction at an early phase, because we cannot guarantee the next step if we lift the sanctions right away. So then what can come next? North Korea has to continue negotiation with the U.S. where to a certain point where it can be satisfied with a compromise, which is lifting at least the partial sanctions. So North Korea has to continue meeting with the U.S. The second hypothesis is possibly North Korea is testing the water to see what kind of intention that the U.S. has this time, because we have a new president. That means that North Korea does not have a real intention to denuclearize, perhaps, but it can buy time by doing so. But the premise is just like this. There should be no severe backlash, right? If North Korea continues to delay any action, then North Korea may find in a situation where everybody will say that we exhausted all options. And North Korea may not want to see that kind of situation in the near future. Because after all, we can talk about other options, including military options. The third hypothesis is perhaps North Korea is very confident about dealing with the U.S. government this time, because in 2016, 2017, North Korea demonstrated certainly that it made huge progress in mastering ICBM technology. So it is possible that North Korea may have some confidence in having a compromised outcome out of the dialogue. Well, in order to do so, anyway, North Korea has to continue talks with the U.S. to have a desirable outcome that it wants. The fourth hypothesis is, it's a good one, actually. North Korea wants to be a normal country, normal state in the international community. In order to do so, North Korea has to come back to the international non-proliferation regime, joining again the NPT and ratifying CWC and working with other partners. So anyway, in order to do that, North Korea has to come to the negotiation table and have a agreeable outcome with the U.S. So whatever the motive behind it is, we have the same result, continuing a dialogue. So the real question is, how can we lead the discussion in a way that we desire? Well, first of all, I think we have to think about the real problem or dilemma that North Korea may face. Because, from North Korea's point of view, dismantlement of or giving up all WMD program may be a non-starter at this point. That's why North Korea is saying that it's going to do step-by-step approach toward the denuclearization. Because once North Korea gives up nuclear component of the entire military capability, then it has to rely on other types of capability, such as conventional capability with some asymmetric an element. So that's why North Korea is testing new types of weapons these days. But that's not the desired outcome. How to solve this problem? Perhaps, well, North Korea may think that it can rely on developing new types of technology related to weapon system. But the outcome is, well, perhaps we can see another different type of regional arms race in this region. Another option to solve this dilemma is perhaps South Korea in the U.S. can change its military posture and may keep the military balance at a lower level. But that creates lots of problems for South Korea because South Korea has to be prepared for any potential threats, right, in the near future. So we cannot change our military posture in a very dramatic way. So that's the real dilemma that we actually have at this point, and how to then what's going to be the next step? Perhaps we have to think about a creative way to encourage North Korea that a denuclearization is the best way, and I will get back to that point later.
And Dr. Pu, Xiaoyu.
Okay, thank you. So I want to talk about how we can, at least but also I want to share how we can maintain an optimistic view in an increasingly depressing world. So this is both personal and professional. So I'm a professor now of international relations at American Public Research University. I teach about this topic, and I was born and grew up in China. So, and for me, my childhood memory or teenager memory is full of like peace, prosperity in China and East Asia. By the way, my first ever international classmates from South Korea. So at Tianjin, at Nankai University in Tianjin. So, but nowadays, where we can find an optimistic view now. So regarding East Asia's relationship with East Asian countries' relationship with each other, East Asia with the United States. So I don't want to sound too naive. So before I talk about optimistic view, I will first highlight 3 reasons why we are living in an increasing depressing world, very briefly. Number 1, U.S.-China relationship will become worse before it becomes better. So now we see all these narrative about the U.S.-China strategic competitions, even rivalry. So the United States worried China might challenge its global dominance, and in China, Chinese Communist Party worried America will eventually change Chinese Communist Party's dominance internally. So those kind of worries shape the long-term relationship between U.S. and China. There are all kinds of implications. Second reason, in the 1990s, or maybe until recent years, in international relations, the security logic and economic logic actually happily compatible with each other. So most China's neighboring countries could have a very good economic relationship with China, including South Korea, including Japan. Meanwhile, they could maintain strained security cooperation with the United States. So people talk about there are 2 logics in East Asia. But increasingly, those 2 logics are tested. So whether South Korea and other countries could maintain security relationship with the United States while maintain very strong economic relationship with China. That's a little bit, countries are put into a dynamic situation. The third reason, President Trump. I mean, people talk about there are 2 types of presidents. President Trump and all the U.S. presidents before him, because all kinds of uncertainty, his style, his policy, especially trade war. So all these give us some reasons we are living in an increasing depressing world. Then let me briefly talk about how we can maintain optimistic view. I have some magic sort of solution. Okay. Number 1, my number one magic solution is we cannot change reality. That's the fact. We can only change our expectations. So why is the reason? So think about the U.S.-China relations. Probably we will not get back to the old days. So U.S.-China relations might only have like a quarter glass of water, not a half glass of water anymore. But it's not empty. So you can change your expectations, right? Even quarter glass of water is not empty. That's one. But maybe the second is maybe the cup could become larger. So even a quarter glass of water maybe not that bad. Think about economic, social, educational ties between U.S. and China, and also China with South Korea become much broader than like two or 3 decades ago, right? So even there are all kinds of political tensions, but social, economic, and cultural ties among these different countries are become broader. So maybe we change some expectations, but we can also see the reality a little bit differently. Second reason, North Korea. I know North Korea is difficult to deal with. But think about 4 or 5 decades ago. There was a country with radical anti-American rhetoric, developed nuclear weapons, and isolated. That country was many, many times larger than today's North Korea. That was China under Mao. But Nixon opened the door to China, and 4 or 5 decades later, we see the relationship, even have all kinds of problems. Today's China is different from today's North Korea. So think about that. So North Korea, difficult, but there are real people living there. They also want to live in a peaceful world. There are hope there. So the last reason why we could still maintain optimistic view, if we think about differently, actually also because of Trump. So I talk about Trump add uncertainty to our evaluation of East Asia, but Trump could be a positive factor as well. When Nixon visit China, people talk about only Nixon could visit China, but nowadays actually people might say probably only Trump in a good position to sort of deal with North Korea. Because the best way to deal with North Korea is to maximize deterrence while also maximize assurance. Which president in a better position to maximize deterrence while maximize assurance? Probably President Trump. So I think there could be some sort of positive factor when we think about East Asia, think about the challenge regarding North Korea. So let me stop here.
Sure. Well, I think it's interesting that all 4 of you have made North Korea one of the seminal points of convergence. You've all suggested something by way of a paradigm shift. You've all suggested some continuation of old attitudes or Cold War thinking, but you've also suggested, in essence, a departure point now, whether it be leadership or other dynamics, such as generational change. So I'd like to push you in 2 directions. One is very specific to the focus of all of you on the North Korea equation, and that is quite simply, do you think it can reform itself out through economic modernization or some sort of political change that makes it a responsible member of Northeast Asia? My second question is really that of generational change. Do you feel that young South Koreans and young Chinese, and for that matter, your perception of young North Koreans, are setting a new expectation level or have new relations in terms of accountability that will make for a different factor, whether that's in North Korea or the regional dynamic as a whole? Dr. Hwang, do you want to start?
Yeah. First question regarding the North Korea's strategy and economic reform. That let me talk about the Kim Jong-un's, the new strategic line, declared the 2018 last year, just 1 week before the inter-Korean summit meeting, the April 2018 last year, the Kim Jong-un initially declared that Byungjin line, developing nuclear weapons capability and economic development simultaneously. But starting from the January last year, the Kim Jong-un showed some kind of different the national strategy and the economic policy. And then he said that he released the new strategic line, which means that now after the end of the 2017, after the North Korea's sixth nuclear test and the Hwasong 15, the missile launch. So the North Korea declared that now they completed the nuclear deterrence against the United States. So now it's okay to possess the nuclear weapons. We are not sure whether North Korea really operationalized the nuclear weapons, but anyway, they argued like that, and then they released a new strategic line that focusing on the socialist economic development. So it seems to me that the Kim Jong-un made a decision to pursue a new strategic line, new economic policy. Although we are not sure whether the Kim Jong-un made the decision to give up nuclear weapons finally. But anyway, it seems to me that Kim Jong-un wants to change North Korea. But still very difficult to give up nuclear weapons completely, because the Kim Jong-un believes that nuclear weapons will to help them to reform the North Korean society and also improve their situation and status in the international community. So it would be very difficult for the North Korea to give up the nuclear weapons completely. So they want to give up, even though they want to give them up, but they will give up at the last moment. So that's why they argue always for the simultaneous step-by-step approach to the denuclearization. So anyway, I think it is true that Kim Jong-un has much interested in the reforming the North Korean society and transforming the North Korea, as opposed to his grandfather and father's the thinking. Second question is more challenging to me, the younger generation. So I teach at university, and then when I have survey on my students, do you agree to the unification on the Korean Peninsula? But mostly they are not interested in the unification. They are more interested in their job after their graduation. So they're not sure because they're not sure whether the unification would give the positive or the negative impact on the South Korea's economic strategies. But eventually, after they took my class on the inter-Korean relations, they agreed to the importance of the unification on the Korean Peninsula. So I think that they are basically interested in the future status of the Korean Peninsula. I mean, the unified Korea. But right now, they are more interested in, more concerned about their job and the current situation in South Korea, both politically and economically. So it is very important to educate them and give some some knowledge to the younger generation on about the future of the Korean Peninsula. So I think they eventually they will be more positive than negative on the unification issue and the future of the unified Korea.
Thank you, Lina.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, for the fourth question, I think right now North Korea is just experience from the over a decade, North Koreans playing the strategy we call the strategy of survival. He wants to survive the regime. And so the characteristic of this survival strategy is keep nuclear weapon, missile test, and they have a solo leadership system, and Kim Jong-un decides everything. And also they have economically, they have a planning economy. And also they have found any ways to invade the sanction and violate the sanction and get the money. But actually, I think from now, Kim Jong-un's consideration is to change North Korea to develop the country. So we call the strategy how to develop the country. So the really beyond the survival, they think this regime is really safe, and they don't need worry about the survival of the regime. And from this point, I think they are trying to develop their economy, and especially you can see the middle class in the North Korea is likely to go promotion. If you go to the Pyongyang and go into the rich restaurant, you can see the rich North Korean people, just very so many and also the lady of the makeup just like South Korean, and so I think they are trying to develop this country. So that's why I think North Korea have to reform themselves. First one, they have to. I think that right now they have a rigid system and corruption system, and but they are doing it totally different from Chinese reform style. Chinese is in 1980s just go into the opening and reform same time, but North Korean cannot do the same time. So that's why right now they decided to reform themselves first, and so that's why I think that right now they are the beginning of the reform. For the second question, I just want to talk about how young North Korean people thinking, and first one, they really like the information and outside. When they have chance to go outside, they really like to collect the information and what's happening outside the world. And also, they're really hard to study and really good at studying. And the Kim Jong-un said the study is another fight. So they study so hard. So there's one example. The North Korean people who stay in Pyongyang, who study the Chinese, is much better than South Korean who stay in Beijing for a long time. And the pronunciation is really good, but they never been to China, and their Chinese is very standard. So that's why they're really eager to learn. And also you can see they have the money-oriented thinking already, and they're eager to study the market economy, and I have gave them a lot of books about the marketing and economy books, and they like to be trained outside. So that's why also Kim Jong-un really liked the young generation. Kim Jong-un really said we have to focus the young generation, making young generation in North Korea really eager to change the North Korea. So right now in the society, you can see there's a kind of like a conflict between the young generation and older generation. The local official, very senior official, really like to be retired, and because they think even the leaders support the young generation. And there's a very interesting story in 2016, and Kim Jong-un brought the senior official and young official to go to a building, the new building, and he just brought them from the bottom to the 12 floors, and everyone have to go the step. They cannot go to the elevator, and in the middle, the senior official cannot go with him, and only young generation go with him. So when Kim Jong-un reached the 12 floors, and he looked at the senior official, they still have very hard to go. He said, They cannot go with me, and you guys go with me. So that's why you can see the Kim Jong-un really think the young generation is a hope for North Korea. Thank you.
Jina Kim?
Yes. Will North Korea reform itself in the future? Well, it has to, but it will do in a very limited way, realistically speaking. Why? Yes, why? I can think of 4 reasons. First of all, if North Korea continues to have a dialogue and wants to lift the sanctions and continue to build its economy, I think North Korea has to borrow money from the International Monetary Fund or World Bank and other, financial institutions. In order to do so, in order to borrow money from the outside, it has to meet certain expectations. In order to do so, it has to change its system. Second, well, North Korea if North Korea decides to denuclearize, then the international community will come back to the negotiation table and provides a lot of help. For example, throughout global partnership or CTR, Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. In that case, North Korea has to open up all the facilities, show to the international community that everything is going well. And transparency, accounting, and management, all these things will be very, very important. In order to do so, North Korea should change itself. Third, well, I can think of a situation where North Korea wants to draw foreign investment to boost up its economy, especially in the specialized zone. In order to do so, it has to show some predictability and stability. And for doing that, North Korea has to change its economic system and other things. Fourth, if North Korea continues to have a dialogue with the international community, it will find itself soon in a position where it is exposed to other kinds of dialogue, not just the discourse on denuclearization, but also a discourse on human rights and others. So North Korea has to find a way to avoid that kind of pressure. In order to avoid that criticism, North Korea has to change itself. So I think yes, but in a limited way, unfortunately. Your second question related to generation change, I can add another aspect. Well, when actually the Supreme People's Assembly election showed that there was a generation change, people from the young generation came up to a certain level. But that also means that these young generations are part of the North Korean system. They are the stakeholders. So perhaps it's their expectation or their interest to maintain the system, not overthrowing system in a dramatic way. So I think that's another view.
Thank you, Gina. On your first point about making North Korea creditworthy, there's actually a new paper with that title by Jonathan Corrado and Tom Byrne, who did the introduction here, out for those interested. You can follow up with Jonathan after. And last, if we could get your insights, please, Pu Xiaoyu.
Okay, very briefly, regarding North Korea's economic reform, I think the best possible scenario is North Korea follow China's model in the late 1970s. So maintain their current government system, but open their economic and a social system. So whether Kim Jong-un could be a credible Deng Xiaoping, that's a big if, because their national security is tied with their regime security. So there's a question to what degree they could feel secure enough so that they focus economic reform without dramatically really using any sort of better economic resources to develop their nuclear weapon instead. So for the international community, probably that's a dilemma, how you evaluate. The second point regarding generational change, I want to add a different sort of factor perspective. So I don't know much about North Korea internal politics. I want to add the Chinese perspective. So I have maintained some sort of collections with hundreds of new generation of international relations scholars in China. I travel back frequently. My impression of this cohort of generation, Chinese scholars work in think tank or universities are better trained, travel worldwide. Many got a PhD or training from US and Europe. So they have much more diverse perspectives than some of the conventional wisdom international media describes. I read the New York Times recently talk about in China, political correctness is no argument. I don't think that's true. So regarding policy issues, there are lively discussions, how to deal with the United States, how to deal with North Korea, different opinions, different perspectives. So although, of course, they don't openly challenge Xi Jinping, that's given today's political atmosphere, that's a little bit dangerous. But regarding different policy issues, theoretical issues, academic issues, policy prescriptions. There are all kinds of very different ideas among these younger generation IELTS scholars. So that's what I want to add.
That's a critically important point, I think, as well, to draw our formal discussion to a close, because I think the tendency of all our respective nations is to draw monoliths in our interpretation of the other's foreign policies, when in fact there is a tremendous amount of diversity of opinion in China, South Korea, Japan for that matter, North Korea, and the United States. I think among many with whom we deal with on the scholarly and professional level. Well, I'm afraid we have to conclude on that note, in that our speakers will be meeting with some of our United Nations colleagues here back in our boardroom shortly. But I did want to thank all four of our speakers for weaving a very rich tapestry and encouraging us to move to some new thinking. Certainly all of you for raising some very good questions. And I did want to acknowledge a few people before we part. One is Rory Daniels, who was the thought leader that brought us here today. So thank you, and the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. Jonathan Corrado, our Director of Policy, who handles all of the logistics issues here at the Society for our policy programs, as well as the thought leadership. So thank you, Jonathan, and Peter Stemke in our sound booth. And also I wanted to acknowledge an academic superstar from China who is here today, Nan Li from Fudan University, who has made such a critical contribution to ideas of regional security over several decades. And so, Professor Nan Li, thank you for coming to the Korea Society, and we look forward to having you back. If you'd like to just stand and be acknowledged, thank you. And I'd like to thank you all, encourage you to please go to koreasociety.org, as well as to NC, National Committee on American Foreign Policy, ncafp.org for membership and more. Both organizations have galas upcoming on October 23rd for the National Committee on American Foreign Policy and November 20th for the Korea Society. So for tickets and information, please go there. For those of you who would like to stay, we do have refreshments and this wonderful Kim Sung-gu exhibition, Better Days, which received a glowing review in its Chicago exhibition in the Financial Times. So please do have a look, and we hope you enjoy it. And I'd invite you back. We have an interesting Olympics program on October 24th. We will be discussing some of the same issues with General Vincent Brooks on November 21st here, and with Dr. John Park from Harvard University on December 5th. So we look forward to having you back. Thank you again, and please, if you could offer our speakers a round of applause. Thank you all for coming.